and sounds a lot like a shapeshifter. Anyway, we left off at where Holly met the man and his grandson, and they're watching videos that he found throughout the time of this Owendowski, that is an outsider. So, without further ado, let's get right back into it. I can't wait to find out what happens next. The witness comes in some cases, like a carjacking or a robbery, several witnesses come in. They describe the doer. Only it's like the blind man with the elephant. You know that story. Holly does. The blind man who grabs the tail says it's a vine. The one who grabs the trunk thinks it's a python. The one who grabs the leg is sure it's the bole of a big old palm tree. Eventually, the blind men get into a brawl about who is right. Every witness sees the guy in a slightly different way, Dan says. And if it's one witness, he or she sees him in a different way or different days. No, they say I was wrong. The face is too fat, it's too thin. He had a goatee. No, it was a mustache. His eyes were blue. No, I slept on it and guessed they were actually gray. He takes another long pull of O2, looking more tired than ever. Except for the eyes and their purple pouches. They are bright. Focused. Holly thinks that if the Owendowski thing saw those eyes, he might be afraid, might want to shut them before they saw too much. My job is to look past all the variations and see the similarities. That's the real gift, and what I put in my pictures. It's what I put in my first pictures of this guy. Look, from the side pocket of his chair, he takes a small folder and hands it to her. Inside are half a dozen pieces of thin drawing paper going brittle with age. There's a different version of Charles Owendowski on each one. They are not as detailed as his rogue gallery in the front hall, but they are still extraordinary. In the first three, she's looking at Paul Freeman, Dave Van Pelt, and Jim Avery. Did you draw these from memory, she asks. Yes, Dan says, again not boasting, just stating a fact. Those first three were drawn soon after I saw Avery, summer of '67. I've made copies, but those are the originals, Brad says. Remember the time frame, Holly? Grandpa saw these men on TV before VCRs, DVRs, or the internet. For ordinary viewers, you saw what you saw and then it was gone. He had to rely on memory. And these others, she spread out the other three like a fan of cards. Faces with different hairlines, different eyes and mouths, different lines, different ages. All different models from the same template, all Owendowski. She can see it because she's seen the elephant. He points to the drawing she's holding, one after another. That one's Ren Goldholder. He reported from Westfield, New Jersey, after John List killed his whole family. The next one is Harry Vale, reporting from Cal State Fullerton after a janitor named Edward Alloway shot and killed 6 people. The last one, his name escapes me. Fred Limmerbach, Brad says, correspondent for WKS Chicago. He covered the Tylenol poisonings in 1982. 7 people died. Talk to grieving relatives. I have all these video clips if you want to see them. He's got plenty of clips. We've uncovered 17 different versions of Chet Owendowski, Dan says. 17. Holly is flabbergasted. Those are just the ones we know of. No need to look at all of them. Slide those first 3 drawings together and hold them up to the TV, Holly. It's not a light box, but it should do. She holds them in front of the blue screen, knowing what she'll see. It's one face, Owendowski's face, an outsider. When they go downstairs, Dan Bell isn't exactly sitting in the same chair. It's more like lolling. No longer just tired, exhausted. Holly doesn't want to trouble him further, but we'll have to. Dan Bell also knows they're not done. He asks Brad to bring him a knock of whiskey. Grandpa, the doctor said. Fuck the doctor and the horse he rode in on, Dan says. It'll brighten me up. We'll finish. You show Holly that last thing, then I'll lie down. I slept through last night, and I bet I will again tonight. This is such a weight off my shoulders. But now it's on mine, Holly thinks. I wish Rolf was here. I wish for Belle even more. Brad brings his Gramps a Flintstone jelly glass with barely enough whiskey in it to cover the bottom. Dan gives it a sour look, but accepts it without comment. From the side pocket of his wheelchair, he takes a bottle of pills with a geriatric-friendly scruff cap. He shakes out a pill, and a half-dozen others spill onto the floor. Pick those up, Brad. I'll get them, Holly says, and does. Dan, meanwhile, puts the pill in his mouth and swallows it with the whiskey. Now I know that's not a good idea, Grandpa, Brad says, sounding pursy. At my funeral, no one will say I died young and handsome, Dan replies. Some color has come into his cheeks, and he's sitting up straight in his chair again. Holly, I have perhaps 20 minutes before that almost useless damn whiskey wears off. Half. Hour at most. I know you have questions, and we have one more thing for you to look at, but let's try to be brief. Joe Lieberman, she says, the psychiatrist you saw in Boston starting in 2018. What about him? You didn't go to him because you thought you were crazy, did you? Of course not. I went for the same reason I imagine you went to see Carl Morton. With his books and lectures about people with weird neuroses. I went to tell everything I knew to someone who was paid to listen, and to find someone else who had reasons to believe the unbelievable. I was looking for you, Holly, just as you were looking for me. Yes, it's true. Still, she thinks it's a miracle we got together, or fate, or God. Although Morton changed all the names and locations for his article, it was easy for Brad to track you down. The thing calling itself Owendowski wasn't their reporting from the Texas cave, by the way. Brad and I looked at all the news footage. Holly says my outsider didn't show up on tape or film. There was footage where he should have been part of a crowd, but he wasn't there. She taps the drawings of Owendowski in his various guises. This perp is on TV all the time. Then he's different, the old man says and shrugs. The way house cats and bobcats are different, but similar. Same template, different models. As for you, Holly, you were barely mentioned in the news reports and never by name. Only as a private citizen who helped with the investigation. I asked to be kept out of it, Holly mutters. By then, I'd read about Carolyn H. in Dr. Morton's articles. I tried to reach out to you with Dr. Lieberman. Made a trip to Boston to see him, which wasn't easy. Dan says. Keeping track would be a more accurate way to put it, since 2005 or so. In every tragedy, in every mass shooting, we look for him, don't we, Brad? Yes, Brad says. He's not always there. He wasn't at Sandy Hook or in Las Vegas when Stephen Paddock killed all those concert goers, but he was working in Orlando in 2016. He interviewed survivors from the Pulse nightclub shooting the next day. He always picks the ones who are most upset, the ones who are inside or lost friends who are. Of course he does, Holly thinks. Of course. Their grief is tasty. But we didn't know he was at the nightclub until after the school bombing last week, Brad says. Did we, Grandpa? No, Dan agrees, even though we checked the Pulse news footage. How did you miss him? Holly asks. Pulse was over 4 years ago. You said you never forget a face, and by then you knew Owendowski's. Even with the changes, it's always the same, a big face. They look at her with identical frowns, so Holly explains what Bill told her about most people having either pig faces or fox faces. In every version she's seen here, Owendowski's face is round, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, but it's always a pig face. Brad still looks puzzled, but his grandfather smiles. That's good, I like it, although there are exceptions. Some people have horse faces. Holly finishes for him. Just what I was going to say. And some people have weasel faces. Although, I suppose you could say weasels have a certain foxy aspect, don't they? Certainly Philip Hannigan. He trails off. Yes, and in that aspect, I bet he always has a fox face. I don't understand you. But you will, Dan says. Show her the Pulse clip, Brad. Brad starts the clip and turns the iPad face to Holly. Again, it's the reporter doing a stand-up, this time in front of a huge pile of flowers and heart balloons and signs saying things like, more love, less hate. The reporter is beginning to interview a sobbing young man with the remains of either dirt or mascara smudging his cheeks. Holly doesn't listen, and this time she doesn't scream because she doesn't have the breath to do it. The reporter, Philip Hannigan, is young, blonde, skinny. He looks like he stepped into the job right out of high school, and yes, he has what Bill Hodges would have called a fox face. He is looking at his interview subject with what could be concern, empathy, sympathy, or barely masked greed. Freeze it, Dan says to Brad and to Holly. Are you all right? That's not Owendowski, she whispers. That's George. That's the man who delivered the bomb to the McCurdy school. Oh, but it is Owendowski, Dan says. He speaks gently, almost kindly. I already told you. This creature doesn't have just one template. He has two, at least two. Holly turned off her phone before knocking on the Bell's door and doesn't think to turn it on again until she's back in her room at the Embassy Suites. Her thoughts are swirling like leaves in a strong wind. When she does power up to continue her report to Ralph, she sees that she has 4 texts, 5 missed calls, and 5 voicemail messages. The missed calls and voicemails are all from her mother. Charlotte knows how to text. Holly showed her, but she never bothers. At least when it comes to her daughter. Holly thinks her mother has found texting insufficient when it comes to crafting a really effective guilt trip. She opens the text first. The movies, they look good. Thanks, will return. Jerome, maybe have a line on that chocolate lab in Parma Heights. Going to check. If you need something, I'm on my cell. Don't hesitate. The last one, also from Jerome. Holly Berry. In spite of all she's learned at the house on Lafayette Street, she has to laugh. And she has to tear up a little too. They all care for her, and she cares for them. It's amazing. She'll try to hold onto that while she deals with her mother. She already knows how each of Charlotte's voicemails will end. Holly, where are you? Call me. That's the first. Holly, I need to speak with you about going to see your uncle this weekend. Call me. The second. Where are you? Why is your phone off? It's very inconsiderate. What if there was an emergency? Call me. The third. That woman from Rolling Hills, Mrs. Braddock, I didn't like her. She seemed very full of herself. She called and said Uncle Henry is very upset. Why aren't you returning my calls? Call me. Big number 4. The fifth is simplicity itself. Call me. Holly goes into the bathroom, opens her notions bag and takes an aspirin. Then she gets down on her knees and folds her hands on the edge of the tub. God, this is Holly. I need to call my mother now. Help me to remember I can stand up for myself without being all nasty and getting into an argument. Help me to finish another day without smoking. I still miss cigarettes, especially at times like this. I still miss Bill too, but I'm glad Jerome and Barbara are in my life. Pete too, even though he can be a little slow on the uptake sometimes. She starts to stand, then resumes the position. I also miss Ralph, and hope he's having a nice vacation with his wife and son. Thus armored, or so she hopes, Holly calls her mother. Charlotte does most of the talking. Holly won't tell her where she is or what she'll be doing, or when she'll be back, and that makes Charlotte very angry. Beneath the anger, Holly senses fear, because Holly has escaped. Holly has a life of her own. Whatever you're doing, we have to be back this weekend, Charlotte says. We need to go see Henry together. We're his family. We're all he's got. I may not be able to do that, Mom. Why? I want to know why. Because I'm working. Charlotte begins to cry. For the last 5 years, Charlotte begins to cry. When Holly was growing up, Charlotte Gibney taught her patiently, perhaps even with good intentions, that she was thoughtless, helpless, hapless, careless, that she was less. Holly believed that until she met Bill Hodges, who thought she was more. Now she has a life, and it is more often than not a happy one. If she broke her mother, it would please her. I don't want to be less, Holly thinks as she sits on the bed in her Embassy Suites room. But there, done that, and got the t-shirt, she adds. She takes a Coke from the bar refrigerator. Then she opens her phone's recording app and continues her report to Ralph. Like praying to a god she can't quite believe in, it clears her head, and by the time she finishes, she knows how she'll go forward. From Holly Gibney's report to Detective Ralph Anderson. From here on, Ralph, I'll try to give you my conversation with Diane and Brad Bell verbatim. While it's still fresh in my mind, it won't be completely accurate, but it will be close. I should have recorded our talk, but never thought of it. I still have a lot to learn about this job. I only could see that Mr. Bell, the old Mr. Bell, wanted to go on. But once that little bit of whiskey wore off, he couldn't. He said he needed to lie down and rest. The last thing he said to Brad was something about the sound recordings. I didn't understand that. Now I do. His grandson wheeled him away to his bedroom, but first he gave me his iPad and opened a photo stream for me. I looked at the pictures while he was gone, then I looked at them again, and I was still looking at them when Brad came back. 17 photos, all taken from videos on the internet, all of Chet in his various incarnations. And an 18th, the one of Philip Hannigan outside the Pulse nightclub 4 years ago. No mustache, blonde hair instead of dark, younger than in the security camera photo of George in his fake delivery uniform. But it was him all right. Same face underneath, same box face. But not the same as Owendowski. No way was he. Brad came back with a bottle and 2 more jelly glasses. Grandpa's whiskey, he said. Maker's Mark. Do you want a little? When I said no, he poured quite a bit into one of the glasses. Well, I need some, he said. When I said I felt sorry, we had the same thing in common. I guess we do. He said his grandfather had always been interested in what he called the second world. Stories about telepathy, ghosts, strange disappearances, lights in the sky. He said some people collect stamps. My grandpa collects stories about the second world. He pointed at the iPad where the picture of George was still on the screen. George with his package full of explosives waiting to be buzzed into the McCready school office. Brad said, now I think I could believe in anything from flying saucers to killer clowns, because there really is a second world. It exists because people refuse to believe it's there. I know that's true, Ralph, and so do you. It's how the thing we killed in Texas survived as long as it did. I asked Brad to explain why his grandfather waited so long. Although by then I had a pretty good idea. He said his grandfather thought it was basically harmless, a kind of exotic chameleon, and if not the last of its species, then one of the last. It lives off grief and pain, maybe not a nice thing, but not so different from maggots, living off decaying flesh. I said I always looked away and said a prayer that the people involved in any accident would be alright. He said if that was true, I was an exception. He said that most people like pain as long as it's not theirs. Then he said, I suppose you don't watch horror movies either. Well, I do, Ralph, but these movies are make-believe. When the director calls cut, the girl who had her throat slashed by Jason or Freddy gets up and grabs a cup of coffee. But still, after this, I may not. Never mind, I don't have time to ramble off on the subject, Brad said. For every clip of killings or disasters that Grandpa and I have collected, there are hundreds more, maybe thousands. News people have a saying, if it bleeds, it leads. That's because the stories people are most interested in are bad news stories. Murders, explosions, car crashes, earthquakes, tidal waves. People like that stuff, and they like it even more now that there's cell phone video. The security footage recorded inside Pulse when Omar Mateen was still rampaging. That has millions of hits. Millions. He said Mr. Bell thought this rare creature was only doing what all the people who watch the news do, feeding on tragedy. The monster, he didn't call it an outsider, was just fortunate enough to live longer by doing it. Mr. Bell was content to watch and marvel until he saw the security camera still of the McCready school bomber. He has that memory for faces, and he knew he'd seen a version of that face at some act of violence not that long ago. It took Brad less than an hour to isolate Philip Hannigan. I found the McCready school bomber 3 more times so far, Brad said, and showed me pictures of the fox-faced man. Always different, but always George underneath, doing 3 different stand-ups. Maybe it's a different man, I said, or creature. I was thinking that if there were 2, Owendowski and the one we killed in Texas, there might be 3 or 4 or a dozen. I remembered a show I saw about endangered species. Only 60 black rhinos left in the world. Only 70 Amur leopards, but that's a lot more than 3. No, Brad said, it's the same guy. I asked him how he could be so sure. Grandpa used to do sketches for the police, he said. Alright guys, I think that is a great place to end off. I'm looking forward to reading some more. We are down to under 120 pages now, so soon we can start on our next story. I am excited. It's by a new author that I can't imagine could be as disappointing as Stephen King is as a human being and an author. I'm just kidding. I have to admit, if it bleeds, I think this one it took halfway to get into, but I have to say this one I like a lot better than the other one, so I'm excited to see where it leads. I hope you are too. Have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and remember to come back and join me next Sunday so we can figure out what happens next.